I really appreciated Daniel's handling of the section on biblical preparation, because if there's any way we must be prepared, it's biblically. He asked you to share your verses that have become kind of a theme verse, a foundational verse for you. And it is always fascinating to me how people come to different passages as the ones that are the ones that the Lord marks out for them as important or most important. For me, it is Colossians 1:28 and 29. And in that passage, I also include 27, but it starts in the middle of a sentence, so you know that Colossians 1:27 tells us about the mystery that has now been revealed of Christ in you, the hope of glory. So when he mentions Christ in you, the hope of glory, he goes on to say, we proclaim him. And before I read the rest, the way I understand that in that context is that this is not evangelism. This is a proclamation of the indwelling Christ in our lives. And the fact that the apostle continually reminds people, talks to people about the fact that they're not alone in what they do. They are the results of life are not dependent on the person by themselves. But in a mystery, God, I guess it's part of what we were thinking about a few minutes ago. We're co-workers with God, an amazing thing. And that he designed it all so that he would use us. And he would use what he has created us to be by uniting himself with us, by indwelling us, by a permanent union between him and us. So Christ is in you, and he's the hope of glory, and we proclaim him, warning every man and teaching every man with all wisdom, that we might present every man or every one complete in Christ. I'm reading from a translation that says every man. It is every one. It's not the male that is empowered in this way. It is humanity who is united with Christ. So we proclaim him, admonishing everyone and teaching everyone with all wisdom, so that we may present everyone complete in Christ. For this purpose also I labor, striving according to all of his power, which mightily works within me. Christ in you, his union with us, provides the resources and the power and the ability to accomplish anything that gets accomplished. But we get to cooperate with him and participate with him in these things. And it's his power. So when we talk about planting churches, it's not just us, it's him. It's him in us being involved in the starting of new churches. When he talks in this passage about presenting everyone complete in Christ, everyone mature in Christ, he is talking about the call to disciple making, to present people mature in Christ is something that we get to do. And if we didn't have anything to do with it, if we didn't have a responsibility in that area, we wouldn't be able to present people because they wouldn't have been the product of something we're involved in. But he says, for this purpose I labor, striving according to all of his power, which mightily works within me. So when we're talking about church planting, it isn't our power. It isn't our ability to persuade. It isn't anything other than his. So when we think about the 14 characteristics of a church planter, we need to remember that God produces those abilities, not in every person, but in some people, at least many of those abilities, and it's his responsibility if he calls us to empower us to do what we're called to do. So I want you to be encouraged. I want you to be encouraged because we are not expecting that everybody will have every ability at the highest level. We're expecting that everyone understands what is needed, and leaders of church plants have some of these things or many of these things in themselves because God has created them that way. But we're going to have a team. We'll have other people walking alongside of us. And if we allow other people to help us in the development of the church plant and be a part of the leadership, it doesn't all depend on us anyway. And in fact, God will empower all of us together. So I want to show a little film clip. It's a commercial from television a few years ago. And it shows Michael Jordan, the basketball player. Is he a familiar name to you? Perhaps the greatest basketball player that has ever played. And I want you to see his story.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
He's acknowledging that he was a failure many, many, many times. And when we're involved in the leadership of the church and as church planters, so will we. There will be times when we try things and it won't work. But you heard the last sentence that he spoke. I failed over and over again, and that's why I succeed. I do think that we need to leave the fear of failing behind as we trust God for things sometimes that we are involved in that we've never done before. And as we walk along pathways we've never been before. And as we receive what we think from him is a vision of the future, and we move toward it along the way, none of us will have perfection. And we'll miss the shots. And we'll feel bad. But it'll be good for us. And we'll succeed as a result of learning from those things. I know you understand that, but we really need to think about here the subject of emotional preparation. And this is the last part on preparation. You might be asking, when are you guys going to ever get to telling us how to plant churches? And we haven't gotten there yet, but we've talked about how to be ready to plant churches. And I think what we are and how well we're prepared is really very important. So the objective of this, oh, by the way, somebody else needs to do this for me because I never. You would see Michael Jordan the entire lecture. Our objective is to establish an emotional foundation for riding the church planting roller coaster. Daniel lives by an amusement park that's famous for its very, very exotic, thrilling roller coasters. Well, in some ways, church planting is like that. There are ups and downs, and so we want to talk about those. Church planting, according to Elmer Towns, is getting a church started in the face of insurmountable obstacles with limited resources in unlikely circumstances. In reality, every time we plant a church and are involved in that process, we're experiencing something that is impossible apart from God. I remember telling church planters when I was recruiting church planters frequently, we would be sitting down and talking about the possibility of planting a church in such and such a location among such and such people. And when we did that, I would say, if God calls you to do this, it will be the hardest thing you will have ever done. But it will also be the most glorious thing you have ever been involved in. And at that time in my career, I was talking about planting one church. What if we planted a church that planted a church that planted a church, and even multiplied churches that planted churches that planted churches. What glory there is, and how worth it is to experience the struggles and to experience the failures along the way. Daniel said, so what if it closes? I wouldn't quite say it that way because it is painful to have a church fail. But I would say we better not stop because there's the risk of that, and let God lead us along the pathway to multiplying the church. The Apostle Paul experienced roller coaster in his life. You know some of these stories? In Acts chapter 9, the experience of his conversion was very unusual and not very pleasant. As you recall, there was this awfully bright light that appeared, the glory of the Lord, and he was blinded. He went through all kinds of things. These passages are here for you to think about and develop your own study for. But among them was the time when he was stoned and left for dead. Some say he was dead and came back to life. Others say that he appeared dead. But I don't care which one it is, that is not a very good experience. But what did he do when he got up from the pit, the rock pit? he went back into town and preached the gospel some more. He re-engaged in the ministry because for him it was crucial to live out the purpose that God had given him in his life. So planters are targets. This doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it is true. Church planting missionaries often suffer. David Garrison, church planting movements, talks about that. And we can read the missionary stories and biographies, and we know that that occurs. Sometimes the assaults are so insidious that they can only be attributed to the evil one. And the reality is that when we choose to be in church leadership and in church planting leadership and in church multiplication leadership and in the expansion of the church leadership and the multiplication of it, we are choosing to be in the target, as a target of the evil one. But what a good enemy to have. Emotional attacks occur. There are disappointments. There are your growth expectations. How many people will have after 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Versus reality. How many people we do have after that amount of time. We have found often, especially when you're in a denomination and you hear the stories of the other one that's going a lot better than yours, we compare ourselves with people, and that can bring emotional distress. And when our vision is not fulfilled the way we thought it would be, there are distresses that come from that disappointment. There are money problems. We don't have enough. There are conflicts and abandonment, getting badly hurt by others or abandoned by people on whom you depend. I have come to understand that when a church planter or a church planting team is starting a small church plant, that you can count on some abandonment early in the process. I can hardly think of an example of churches that were planted during the time of my leadership where in the process, people who were counted on at the beginning, my good friends who are so committed to us and who helped to generate the early ideas as we conceived this church plant. And 9 months later, they're gone. And not always because they have a new job in a new city, but they have left because they didn't like something that was happening in the church plant and often attributed it to the planter. And people leave. The planters and other people's unresolved emotional baggage is also a part of the emotional distress that comes about. But we're going to be talking about dealing with some of these things. Planting landmines are also come about. Some of them are self-inflicted. Somebody has said, the beauty of church planting is that there isn't anyone to tell us what to do. We have freedom. And the danger of church planting is that there isn't anyone to tell us what to do. We have freedom to become self-centered, lazy, or manipulators, to use our techniques to get it accomplished. Planters who have the ability to start churches from scratch, who have that gift mix, that entrepreneurial ability to do that, also have some abilities that can be misused. Attractive personalities, relationship building skills, ability to be empathetic, and solid communication skills, to name a few. And those can be misused as well as used well. Add to that the fact that new churches exist to reach out to a hurting and needy world, and Satan has a pretty good opportunity to exploit us. The people we target to reach with the gospel come with enough baggage that when joined with our own weaknesses can lead to powerful volatility. Earlier, I think it was Daniel that was talking about the family and setting boundaries. And one of the boundary areas that my wife and I talked about was the boundary of how I related to women in the church. And we talked about how if there was some danger coming, that I made a commitment that I would immediately, in those days, get into my office so I could find my phone and call her, or I would run away like would be good to get out of the temptation area. And I remember we were standing at the church door after a service one Sunday. And as the people were coming by saying, "Thank you, Pastor, good sermon," actually, that doesn't encourage me very much. I don't know about you. "Thank you, Pastor, good sermon." I liked it better when somebody came by and said, "Thank you, Steve. That was a good speech." Because I knew we had somebody in the church who didn't know the language and probably needed to know Jesus Christ and was in that way beginning to respond to the message of the message. But anyway, that Sunday, we were standing on the steps and along came a young woman and she shook my hand. And then she shook my hand some more. And then it went more. And I said, "Elaine." And I got my hand away. And after that, we talked about that. Because there are people that will come on you because you're a kind person, you're a pastoral person, you're an authority kind of person, and so we need to protect ourselves. And Satan has an opportunity, if we're weak, to allow that to go farther than it should. There was a wonderful new pastor in our region of California who came into a church that had been troubled by a series of difficult pastoral tenure endings. In other words, they came to the end and it was not pleasant, and the church had to recover about 3 times. And then this new pastor came, and what a gifted man. What a great guy he was. What a wonderful, wonderful person. And I was working with him as he was developing a new vision, and they were seeing it start to be lived out in the church in a wonderful way. And then I got a phone call. I was the district superintendent. And I found out that he had taken a sabbatical and for a couple of months was going away to study. He chose to study in the nearby mountains in a place that somebody had loaned to him. And one of the women in his Bible study, in his small group, went up there and met him, and they had an affair. He came back down at the end of the sabbatical, came into the office, and what the pastor didn't know was that the woman had told the elders when she came back home. What an awful day that was. What an awful day that was. That pastor's ministry life at a young age, under 40, was ruined forever, at least to this day. And that was 20 years ago. We've got to walk with Jesus in such a way that we are prepared to meet the challenges of our emotional life that can lead to temptation that can hurt us. Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Sometimes we get so busy with the work of the ministry, we forget to cultivate our walk with Jesus. We forget to trust Him during our days. And we allow ourselves to contemplate stuff that we shouldn't contemplate. It's not wrong to be tempted, but it is a tragedy when we allow ourselves to dwell on the temptation. Because eventually, if we keep doing that, we'll have maybe not the experience of adultery, but something will happen that will potentially shipwreck our life and ministry and our family. Sex, money, power, and pride are the danger areas that can get to us. And we can think about ways to be protected, accountability partners. There are protective websites about pornography and things like that we can use and share with our accountability partners so that they will know if we go on those sites. More than that, because we can defeat those things, we can use another computer. We can get around them. But honest relationships are crucial, and a walk with Jesus is essential. I know that in my life, I have been tempted when the pressure was off, when the big project was over, when something we had been trusting God for was completed, and maybe there was victory. And like Elijah at Mount Carmel, I was tempted to take some time off. Not just time off from the intensity of work, but time off from my relationship with the Lord. What a dangerous thing to do. There is never a time for a holiday from God. And so I've learned that along the way. And I just want to encourage you, if there's danger in your life, to start talking about it with somebody that you trust, and get whatever help you need to bring into your life. Now, a nice other aspect of this is that we need to really think about ministering from our strengths. One of the best things about my life as I've gotten to the age that I am is that I realized that in many ways I have gotten to know myself in the last 10, 15 years in a way that I know when to say yes and when to say no to stuff. Intentional people understand how God has made them. They play to their strengths and they find ways to compensate for their weaknesses or find people to complement them. And all of us have weaknesses. There is nobody in this room that will score an 8, 9, or 10 on 14 categories. That's simply not a realistic expectation. We all have relative weaknesses. And so it is really good, though, when we can, to operate in the area of our strengths and our gifts and the way that our personality has been made. And so that's why we do that assessment, the important tool of assessment. It helps us to know ourselves even better. And a personal growth plan, there is one in that back of the book, one of the maps, which we didn't really talk about very much, but you could use that as you go on a time away, maybe an annual retreat, and ask God to reveal to you what you need to do to spiritually grow in the next area of your life. What areas need to be addressed? And that will be helpful to you. Have you heard the illustration of putting the big rocks in first? We all have major initiatives, projects, things that have to be done in order for us to move forward on our vision. And we call those the big rocks. But we all have other things that happen, kind of routine activities, and sometimes emergency activities, things that come up. And so if I were to take a jar like that and fill it with rocks, with big rocks, fill it to the total top so I could barely get the lid on, would you say, that jar is full? Yeah, no? Yes? What if I took some pebbles and dropped them on the top of that full jar? What would happen? There would be a lot more volume that would go into that jar. Would it be full? I could take sand and pour it into the jar. And then a lot more weight of a mass of material would be in there. Would it be full? What could I do? Water. I could pour some water in it. Our lives get filled up. The big rocks are the major essential activities that you must do for the next week or month in order to move forward on your major goals. The small rocks are important but aren't comparable to the big rocks as priorities. The sand and water are the normal day-to-day responsibilities. If I put the sand and water in first and maybe a few small rocks, I won't ever get to the big rocks because I won't be able to get them in. You have to put the big rocks in first. You have to know ahead of time, what are the important things that I must do, that are essential, that are not optional in my life to be the leader of this church plant, of this project. And when I put the big rocks in first, then there will be room for smaller rocks, things that are important but not as big, and the sand and water, the normal activities. But I won't allow those to control my life and direction. You understand what I'm saying? If I plan ahead of time about the big things, the essential things, the important things, then I will know that the other things are less important, and I will know that some of those things I will have to say no to. So it becomes helpful to develop a rhythm in our lives, and this rhythm developing was one of the most important things that I have ever done. It came to me as a work assignment. It came to me as a thing that I was required to do for my job. And that was to have a daily devotional life. That didn't really come new as a new requirement. And to have a weekly withdrawal, some kind of Sabbath where I remove myself from the normal activities, maybe for family time, getaway time, worship time, that I have a weekly time. But the monthly time that they asked me to do was to spend a day, once a month, as part of my work assignment, to spend it with the Lord, to evaluate what had been happening in my life's ministry, and to think about what was crucial, what were the big rocks for the next month. And in order to do that effectively, they asked me to do an annual retreat, and for them it was a 3-day retreat where we would get off by ourselves and think through how the last year has gone, how well we did in accomplishing what we thought we were going to do, and then to consider with God what the next year's priorities would be. When I started doing that, I will have to tell you that first 3-day retreat for me was the hardest thing that I've ever done. As June said, it wasn't that I didn't like it, I hated it. And I remember sitting at this desk trying to figure out what I was supposed to do and to think about last year and next year and all of this. And I couldn't do it. And I realized, the way I do this kind of thinking is with somebody else in the room. And later on I realized if I have somebody else that I can bounce these things off of, I can do this kind of thing. But I did it alone because that was the assignment. And then I did my monthly retreats alone, and they were hard also. You'd think, that's your day off? Not for me, it wasn't. It was hard. But I have never accomplished more with less exertion of energy than I did in that next year. The first time in my life, I really knew where I was headed and what was important and what to say yes to and what to say no to. And it changed my life experience. I wouldn't give it up now for anything than to have this kind of a rhythm in my life. But those first times were hard. I felt like at the end of that first year that I was like the author, the writer, who was being interviewed for an article because he had written a bestseller. And the interviewer asked him, so tell me, how did you come to enjoy writing? And he said, actually, I don't enjoy writing. I just enjoy having written. And that's how it was for me with this. I didn't enjoy the process so much, but I did enjoy the fruit of it. So I want to encourage you to think about this. For me, it's better as a verbal processor to do it with a partner. In other words, every kind of discipline that we put into our lives, spiritual disciplines and all, are not to be done the same way by everybody. It doesn't work that way. We need to find what works for us to be in the Word and to be in prayer. June said he did it at night because that's his best time. Well, the books say all to do it in the morning. Didn't June read the books? He shouldn't pay attention to those books. He needs to cultivate his relationship with God in the way that works for him. And for me, to plan well for my life priorities, I also need to do it in a way that works for me. So I hope that's helpful to think about, because I have found that people who do this sort of thing, almost all of them say that it has really, really increased the effectiveness of their life and the accomplishment of their life. So develop a rhythm. The annual planning retreat, well, the daily devotions and the weekly Sabbath are important for spiritual health. But the annual planning retreat sets yearly leadership direction. The monthly retreat day keeps things on time and moving in the right direction, so that I do the things during the month that will contribute to the full effectiveness of accomplishing what God has given me for the year. You want to comment about this? Talk to me about this. And if it hasn't made any sense, tell me that too. Does anybody have any questions?
This is very unnatural for Slovak, and we need to learn to do these things. We think we need to be all spontaneous, we think we need to improvise all the time, and come naturally.
I didn't know that I was Slovak, but I've just been checking out my genealogy online, and there was no Central European stuff, but it wasn't natural for me either. And it isn't natural for a lot of people. There are some people, and maybe there will be fewer here because that's not your culture, but there are some people who just love this, and they just anxiously awaited their next retreat day or their annual retreat. But we can talk about it some more if that would be helpful, because it certainly has been helpful in my life. And let's see what God might do. So the map is to figure this out for yourself. And I would not say, if you're in the situation that Tomasz is saying, I would not do this yet, except maybe the daily, and make sure that daily, and there is some weekly plan for a difference in life, so that you do not avoid the principle of Shabbat, Sabbath, in your life. And I know that God doesn't require a Saturday Sabbath for us, but He has designed us so that we don't work every day of the week. And we need to cooperate with that design. So daily devotions and Sabbath weekly is a really good thing to start working on. And if you're ready to give this a shot, you might try it. And if you're not ready, just spend some time talking to the Lord about it and see if He would give you a way. Maybe not a whole day, maybe 3 hours. But if you start to do this and you're under the employment of someone else, make sure that they understand that you're working and that it's not a day off. Yeah.
Coming from Illinois, we like Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, Abraham Lincoln, who is he?
President of the United
Oh, okay, all right.
There's a story about how he was in competition with another guy to chop a tree down. First guy started wailing at that tree with his axe. Abraham Lincoln was right there grinding down his edge. And spent about 1/4 of the time just grinding the edge of his axe. And he beat the guy who was just wailing on the tree the whole time.
Because he sharpened his
He
axe.
sharpened his axe.
Yeah. I think that that's a good analogy of what we're talking about. It's sharpening our axe. It's sharpening our focus on life. And for me, it enabled me to accomplish, as I look back on that first year and that second year and so forth, it enabled me to accomplish far more than I ever did before. I say it very clearly, though, it wasn't fun. A lot of things we're going to do aren't going to be just really exciting and happy, but the results might be. Yes, sir.
I would be interested to hear an example. What did you do? Because I understand that it is important, and there were certain times in my life when I decided I had to go away and spend maybe the day or half a day or 2 days just with the Lord. But it was the same with me like with you. And there I was on my own. I did pray, but what to do?
I understand. Okay. I mean, I probably can't give a full description, but I can give an illustration of what it was for me. I was a church planting director for the western region of the United States. That was a job I had never done before. That was a job that, in actuality, no one had ever done before that I knew of. Maybe in another denomination somewhere that I didn't know. But I was beginning to walk down a pathway that I had not been on before. So what are my priorities? What are the things that are essential? I kind of knew what the vision was out there of what we wanted to see. And for me, at that stage of my understanding, it was to develop a way of using some of these techniques that I had been learning to support church planters in a broad basis across the whole range of our region, which wasn't small. So you think of a country like this, it would be bigger than your country. How can I incorporate my understanding of the things that are important and mobilize a team to accomplish that? How do I develop teammates who will also help me do the dreaming and thinking and leading? How will I develop a core of church planting trainers, assessors, coaches? And how will we keep all of that operational and moving forward and not fizzling out after the first group of people started getting tired? How would we put all of this together? And so that's what I began to think about. For a church planter, it would be over the next days, you're going to be hearing about the conception phase of the church plant and how to develop the foundational, it's more than documents, principles of the church plant, the vision for the church plant, the target community, and how we will relate to them and how we will get to know them and all of those things. How do you do that? And the answer is that you've got to give time to thinking about that. And maybe in partnership with someone else, say, I'm going to think through some of these things, and then I'd like to bounce them off you and see if I'm on a track that might help to get to the fulfillment of that vision. And so that's what I started to do. What do I need to do in the next 3 months, for example, to have, after 3 years, a working system of assessment, basic training, and coaching that would enable us to have an ongoing, effective, successful church planting movement that was bigger in geography than I had ever known before. And so that's what I started working on. And I figured out the main things I needed to do over those next months to move me along. But that wasn't natural for me, but I began to be able to think, okay, I need to accomplish that. What kind of stuff do I need to do? I need to figure out a strategy. So my first month or two was starting to write down a strategy plan. I need to recruit some people. I start thinking about who those people might be to help me to accomplish that. I started to think about what kind of gatherings would best support a cluster of church planters in a given geography, and how often could we get together so that they would not just feel alone out there, but could be kind of cross-pollinating with one another and helping each other, along with me being able to have access to them as issues came up. So that's what I did, and it started to work. Okay? For everybody, it'll be different because you will have different challenges, but in church planting, it'll be somewhat similar, so you can share experiences if some of you get into doing this. And if I can do it, you can do it, because it was so unnatural, but it began to be something that I so treasured that it was worth the effort. I so treasured it. It's kind of like flying to Slovakia. You know, I don't like flying, especially when it's 12 or 13 hours of cramped airline seats. But I love to have flown because I love to be with you. There are things like that in all of our lives. And so this is one of those kind of things that could be helpful. I'll be glad to keep talking to you about it yes.
One question about these monthly retreats and annual retreats.
Yeah.
Was it part of your working hours, or was it your day off?
No, it was part of my working hours.
What would you say to someone who really wants to do that, but people around him, their elders or other people who understand that they need it?
Well, I would really become creative. That'll be one of my first projects, to really creatively explain and give a rationale, an apologetic for this, and how this will help me to be a better pastor or church planter. If I do this and I take the time to prepare, you will find, I believe, by the end of the year, that your pastor suddenly got better.
Now, after all these years, would it be something, would you be stubborn on it? That, okay, it has to be done this way, or you would say, okay, if you know, that's fine.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
So if, from now, after all your experiences, would you say that it has to be done, or you would say, okay, if I can't do it, that's fine, I can do my work without it?
Yes. Quite frankly, most people don't do it on a consistent basis. I just say that it would be better. It would be very helpful to you to figure out how to do it. Now, many of you are bivocational. You have other jobs. You can't take 3 days off and tell your employer that I'm going to be gone because I'm on my retreat. That wouldn't work. usually. Right? So what you would have to do is think through how to use and prepare your wife and family or whatever for a Saturday or a half of a Saturday to begin to do some of this. Maybe once a year, figuring out how to get a couple days or a couple of evenings to make sure it gets done. If you're the kind of guy I am, I would bring somebody in to do it with me so you can both experience it together and bounce your ideas off of each other, just to make sure you're on the right track. I think that's a real help that is a real help for me. That's an adjustment I made on my own because the boss, the top guy, he loved doing this, so he couldn't imagine that it was hard. And when I told him it was hard, he thought I was joking.
He was not slow.
Huh?
He was not slow.
He wasn't a Slovak, that's exactly true. But start working on it a little small maybe, and see if you can gain some ground by doing this. And if it works, and you gain some significant ground, then you can kind of add to it after the first 6 months or the first year. And see if pre-planning, time away from the pressure, where you can think and pray, open the Word of God, maybe spend part of your time reading an important leadership book, chapter, and think about how you can apply it. See what happens. And I just encourage you to try it. And if you're the kind of person who's like, there may be one Slovak out of 40 people who say, that sounds great to me, I'm going to do it next month. Do it. And give a report to the rest of the folks. Yes.
We as the leadership of the campus crusade in Slovakia actually, we put into our principles that we are encouraging everybody to take twice a year, like 2-3 days for the retreat, and we even gave them kind of the budget for it. Because I think it's really essential to do that.
Are you doing that?
Yeah, and if the leadership of any Christian organization doesn't understand that's sad, really.
And you're Slovak?
Yeah.
You're not
And
an
if you
import?
start
You're not
to
an
do
import?
it, you will enjoy it.
Campus Crusade is American.
But he's Slovak. Okay, thanks
So
for the...
I'm doing once a year, I'm going by myself, and once a year I'm going with Monica, and we are trying to go over what's happened,
Thanks for the testimonial, Milan. Give it a try. Yeah.
I think one thing Milan pointed out was that stood out to me right now is that the leadership, like creative thinking and ways of thinking such as this, begin with the leadership. And if your leadership is not thinking this way now, I think he was asking, do I stand with my stake in the ground saying this is what we must do, or do I graciously seek to persuade that this would be best? Consider this. Prayerfully consider this. Not stake in the ground. That is typically not a biblical worldview, but prayerfully consider this, seeking to change the mindset of the leadership, which then everyone else follows. So that was just something that's good.
Yeah, and if you're a leader and you decide it's really good, you got to graciously and gently help the folks under you to do that. But that's a great prayerfully consider it. He's much more gracious in his word. Gracious, prayerfully consider it, And let's see what God might do. And maybe we'll hear some testimonies of some success besides new life. Okay? All right?
That's the new man in Christ speaking.
The new man in Christ.
The old one died.
Okay. Did you have something, Ben? You're just saying it's time for me to stop?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Thanks for letting me present something that's different and I trust helpful. Lord, just continue to work in us to make us what you want us to be, and so we can be a part